Martin Chulov is the Middle East correspondent for the UK's Guardian newspaper, and he joins us on the phone from neighbouring Lebanon. Good morning. Thanks for your time. Now, as Western nations continue to expel Syrian diplomats, senior Syrian diplomats, is this likely to change anything on the ground?
I don't think it will. I think that the regime will calculate quite rightly that the West is calling its bluff by expelling its diplomats, and it's not going to do anything much more than that. It thinks that its narrative is prevailing, and that narrative is that Al-Qaeda are responsible for all of this carnage that we're seeing in the country, and they think that if they stick to that, if they ride the West out, then they will prevail in the end.
Well, the West is saying that a lot of this violence, particularly the Hula massacre, is the result of Shabaab militia, which are pro-regime militia. Is the change in how the violence is taking place, is that's what's prompted this international response?
I think there's been a suspicion for a long time, based on very solid grounds, that the Syrian narrative of Al-Qaeda being responsible is a false narrative, that the bulk of the violence, the explosions that we've been seeing, the raids into people's houses have indeed been caused by pro-regime militias, the Shabaab that you speak about, the regime forces themselves. It's not to say it hasn't been a two-way fight in some parts of the country, but the grotesque, depraved stuff that we've been reporting on has by and large been caused by regime forces.
And Martin Chulov, the United States has come out overnight with some rather strong language and has talked about Syria's only friend now being Iran. Let's hear a little bit of what Victoria Newland from the US State Department had to say, and if I can get your response to it after, please.
Our message again would be for any Syrians who are still supporting this regime, still firing on its orders, to look hard at what it is doing. And again, the fact that Assad has to call in these Shabiha thugs, has to hire thugs off the street to go do his dirty bidding, and has to get outside aid from his only friend left, the Iranians, speaks to his desperation.
So what do you make of that, Martin Chulov?
I do think it's true that Iran are heavily invested in Syria. They will not accept Damascus falling. They will do everything they can to protect the regime. In terms of the situation on the ground, it is bitterly divided. As unpopular as Assad is inside of his country and outside, he does have a residual support, and it's almost an unwavering support from the Alawite clan. That is a minority clan that's responsible for about 12% of the overall population in Syria, from which Mr. Assad belongs, and also from which he draws his power base. They are with him. Most of the Christians are with him. The opposition is predominantly Sunni, and the dynamics of that are very scary. We are looking at a sectarian division which is steadily marching towards a full-on sectarian war in Syria.
And how key is Russia's influence here?
It's very important. There's no doubt about that. Russia are heavily invested in Syria as well. Perhaps not as much as Iran is, but invested nonetheless. They see Syria as their gateway to the Arabian Peninsula. They have some established trade routes there, and they have some historical ties. The Americans and the West have been looking for Russia to soften its unwavering support for Assad. They may succeed with that, but Russia seems to be very, very keen for the regime to stay in place if Assad goes.
Kofi Annan says Syria is now at a tipping point. Where does this leave the UN observer mission?
It's been flawed since the outset. The observer mission is 6 weeks old, and neither side has abided by any of its points. It's been a peace plan on paper alone. There is a strong case to be made that 300 monitors, even if they could make it into the country, and we should bear in mind that only half of those monitors have so far, 300 aren't enough to do anything like supervise any sort of meaningful peace in Syria's 10 provinces. To be effective in any way, they would need at least 10 times that, I would argue, and I think that's what Mr. Annan will be pushing for: more UN monitors on ground and more chance to actually enforce any notion of a peace plan.
Martin Chulov, thank you very much for speaking to us from Beirut. Thanks for your insights.
You're welcome.